Welcome to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. This is our weekly venture into the world of small to medium-sized businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit that drives success.
So our goal here is to help you grow and to be the best you can be, both in business and personally. To do that, we identify and we discuss topics that will hopefully help you as you work to build a successful business.
We also interview business owners and executives. It's our hope that you may be able to gain insight on ways to help you be a better leader and provide a better culture for your people.
Our mission here is to help you pull the chute once a week to work on your business instead of always working in your business.
So we hope you find these discussions insightful, helpful, and useful.
And thanks for your support. We hope you enjoy today's podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pull the Chute podcast with Jeff and Jana. As always, we're so excited that you are here. Jana, how are you today?
I'm good. It's Friday.
It is Friday for us, yeah.
We record these during the week. We post them on Wednesdays, but we record them at all times of the hour and day.
We do.
So,
we do.
Yeah.
We've had a busy week. I will say, just for a plug real quick, but I mean, we had 7 interviews this week, which is insane. But
and some good ones, and we're expecting Norman's to be good as well.
Yeah, it's been so great. Yeah, so Norman Wolfe is with us today. Norman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. Nice to be here. It's a real pleasure.
And so we're excited to hear a little bit about Norman and what he does. He has a very interesting leadership program or leadership site, company is the word I'm looking for there. But I'll let him tell you about that. So Norman, do us a favor for our listeners. Give us a little bit of background about, who you are and how you got to where you're at today.
Happy to. So who am I? Gosh. Well, I'm a management.
It's a loaded question, huh?
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a grandparent, a grandfather, and anyway, I am a management consultant. I have a consulting firm. I've been consulting actually since 1988.
Okay.
So, gosh, I don't know. I can never calculate. 35, 36 years. And I started my career as a systems programmer, system designer with Pratt & Whitney aircraft. Then I moved over to Hewlett Packard, and I spent 15 years with HP. What I consider the iconic HP during the heyday of HP's fame and fortune. So it was a really wonderful experience living in what's now known as the HP way. And so spent 15 years climbing through the corporate ranks, and then in 1988 it was time for me to move out on my own, and I started to consult. Some highlights of my career, I think, is in my about 2-3 years into my career at HP, I was offered the opportunity to move from being a systems engineer working with the sales department to become a district service manager. So you have to understand a little context, because the service organization and the sales organization really didn't quite get along.
Yeah.
The traditional.
Imagine that.
Yeah. The salesman will sell it, and then the poor service guys have to make it work, right? So
Yep.
there's a little bit of that dynamic going on. So here I am from the sales organization, now heading an organization for which I had absolutely no technical expertise or knowledge. I did not know how to fix computers. What I did know was how to work with customers, and that was the shift that HP wanted to create for the service organization. From technicians, they basically grew the organization at that time from taking technicians who fixed products on the bench, put them in cars and said, go fix the products in the field. Well, fixing products and fixing customers are very different things. So that's a little bit of context. And so here I am, my first year in management, and I have all this youthful enthusiasm, and I get my first performance review, and it's unacceptable in every category.
Wow.
I mean, I
shocker,
was thrown for a loop, right? I was going to go back into the technical field because I was extremely good at that, getting high ratings and a lot of acknowledgement. But I was mentored and coached to stick with it, that I showed potential and I was turning a corner. And so I did. But what that did for me was it made me look at the whole area of organization, leadership and management and people and getting results and how do you actually do that. So it became a lifelong journey for me to look at how do we actually create the outcomes we create. Managed to continue to increase my visibility in my career at HP. I took over the region admin organization, which was about 1,200 people, 13 Western states, 17 branch offices. So, a typical large corporation executive position. And it was also a dysfunctioning organization. And it was also an organization that I did not grow up in, right? So I came from the service and now I'm running the admin organization.
Mhm.
So again, turnaround situation, major turnaround situation. It was the worst performing organization in the country, if not in the world. Um, and so again, the challenge of how do you help an organization of people, now a fairly large one, achieve results. So I began to develop certain skills, inherent skills, and I decided, wow, I've been in the corporate world all my life. Now it's time to get out on my own. So jumped the big mothership of security that the corporate life
Uh-huh.
offers and into the oceans of entrepreneurship with absolutely no knowledge of what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. But I figured I had all this wonderful experience running organizations and learning how to lead them that I could help small and medium-sized businesses with what I knew because they did not have the resources I was blessed with at HB, especially the training resources, the leadership training programs we went through, and the personal development programs we were allowed to go through. So here I am talking to people that, hey, this is me, this is what I did at HP. How can I help you? And so I got involved in all sorts of different challenges, everything from sales training, because obviously I came from the sales region, to business process reengineering or total quality management or lean operations, whatever you want to call that,
Mhm.
improving processes domain, um, to strategy development, to all the ways up to becoming an executive coach, CEO coaching, strategy execution, and so forth. I also took a number of jobs along the path as a interim CEO, interim president, working with an owner founder typically who needed somebody to come in for a while and help sort things out on a more day-to-day basis. Um, so I did that for a while. So through the late 80s, or through the 90s, um, I classified that whole area as opportunistic consulting because I didn't really have a focus. I just had experience.
Yeah.
And the more I worked with different clients, the broader my experience grew, and the more I kept getting into new things, turnarounds, mergers and acquisitions, and on and on and on. In 2001, I was invited. One of my clients asked me to join his board. It was a public company. And so now I have public company board experience, which was also interesting because that happened at the time Sarbanes-Oxley came out and the whole area of corporate governance was being challenged. And I
Wow.
was speaking with the CEO and I asked him, why do you keep hiring me as a consultant? What value do you get out of it? Because at this time I was thinking I need to bring some focus to the work I did.
Mhm.
And he said, Norman, that's easy. You help me execute faster. Well, a light bulb went off and I said, of course, that's what I've always been focused on. How do I help organizations get from where they are to where they want to be more effectively? As I began to focus on that, I began to realize that organizations globally are not very good at that. The statistics say 70% of organizations fail to achieve their strategies, strategy, culture eats strategy for lunch, and all these other kind of statistics, including the Gallup poll statistics that has been out for um, well over 4 decades now, that 70% of people are disengaged. I started to look at that and I began to wonder why. Why all these companies, and if you put that in the context of all of the rich wisdom we've been given over the decades, from Peter Drucker to Tom Peters to uh, Daniel Pink to Jim Collins to Conscious Capital. I mean, the wisdom out there is phenomenal. You think people would be able to adapt much of that and be more successful.
Right.
that's when I began to realize we are suffering from what I call a kind of a locked-in paradigm that no longer works. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at how the original way, the original pattern of management thinking, it emanates from the early 1900s when the modern corporation was created, right? Frederick Taylor, in his focus on creating efficient organizations, was all about process optimization.
Mhm.
And a gentleman by the name of Henri Fayol, who doesn't get quite as much credit as Taylor does, he wrote a book, something translated roughly The Administration of Organizations, and he's the one that established the principles behind hierarchy, the principles behind specialization and focusing people and overseeing people, and that's the way you would manage an organization. So those two people combined basically created what I call the mechanistic approach to management.
Okay.
Interesting little side bit. Both of them were mechanical engineers by training. So, hello,
Yeah.
kind of makes sense,
That's
right?
funny. Yeah.
Now, back in the 1900s, the conditions we were facing were very, very different than the conditions we're facing in the currently, right? Back then, you had relatively low-skilled people entering into fundamentally manufacturing operations.
Mhm.
You have there's an environment that, relatively speaking, did not change quite as rapidly. You know, when you did your 5-year plan, it was fairly safe that the environment 5 years from now, we're going to look pretty close to the environment we have today. You know, maybe things would change at a 10-year pace or a 5.5 year, but you knew the environment wasn't going to change a lot compared to today, right? I mean, you can't go 3 years without something significant showing up, whether it
Yeah.
be social media or now artificial intelligence, virtual reality. I mean, who knows what's going to come next that's going to disrupt how we do business. Back then, your competitors were typically within the industry and they were well known.
Mhm.
Today, you don't know where your competitors are going to come from. Is ChatGPT going to be your next competitor? Is Amazon going to compete with doctors? I mean, you just don't know where things are coming from. So it's a very different world. Plus, we're more into the knowledge-based economy.
Mhm.
So we're moving from the human labor, which is what they focused on. How do you optimize human labor to human knowledge and creativity and innovation? Very different environments. But we're still managing with that same mechanistic approach to business. And to summarize how that looks in reality, taking away all the nice fluff we sometimes put on it, it's the responsibility of the leader to design the machine. That is, figure out, you got inputs coming in, you got outputs going out. What do you do inside to make that conversion, right? Leader's job to do that. And when I say the leader, it could be the owner or it could be the leadership team. And then they organize it and they decide what resources they need. They need 4 pieces of capital equipment machine here and these kinds of facilities over there. And then they continue that process and say, I need 5 engineers with these skills. I need 4 salespeople with these skills. And they go to what I love to euphemistically call the big box employment shop, the Costco of employment. We call that Indeed or some other such. And
Mhm.
they go through the aisles and they go down the engineering aisle and they've got their spec sheet, we call them job descriptions, and they go buy these components and plug them into the machine. And that's the way we manage. So people are nothing more than component parts of the machine, barely thought of as irreplaceable. If you're not doing a good job, well, you're a broken component. I'll take you out and plug somebody else.
So I think what you're describing is a top-down mentality, right?
Right. We talk about this all the time. It's top down.
Top down,
Yeah.
top down approach, mechanistic approach. People
Right.
are nothing more than cogs in the wheel,
Right.
Right.
etc., etc. And then we compound that by taking the theory of motivation, which we know from Hertzberg, and then Daniel Pieck writes his book, which is a replacement, which is just a repeat of the things we learned in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. we motivate people primarily by bribing them. Manipulation and bribery, right? We call that incentives,
Right.
bonuses.
Yeah, right.
But really what we're doing is, look, you know, I'll give you this reward if you do something. Now, if you're a human being and you're put in that environment where really you're treated as a component part and the way they motivate you is to bribe you, how engaged would you be?
Right.
Right.
So ergo, we have 70% of people disengaged. And if 70% of people disengaged, then you don't have the energy to and commitment to create the outcomes you want. And so they're not buying in and they don't believe you and there's distrust and all those things that we see. And so you have this wonderful strategy, but you can't execute it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the traditional view, and that's the problem we're facing.
Totally agree with that, by the way. I mean, it's just out there, you know, and Jan and I talk about this all the time, but you know, the reality is that the cultures, the leaders, they're unappreciative. They don't care about what they do, you know, how they treat people. You know, they're almost downright sometimes just belligerent about things, and they want things done a certain way. And so when people are leaving, you know, again, we talked about the Great Resignation here recently, the last couple of years, right? It was all about that. It was all about people
That's
wanting to
right.
be treated better.
They had the opportunity, the environment was such, they said, hell, I'm not going to live in this environment. I'm going to leave.
Well, and
And
especially if it's a publicly traded company or it's a company where you do have a board that oversees it. And let's think about the boards. A lot of times these boards are people that are in other industries, and their motivation might not really be to help that particular business, but just wanting to be on a board. You know what I mean? So there's all of this kind of
it's a
miscommunication,
whole
which we
bunch
talk
of,
about a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think you're 100% correct, and I'm going to just make one other observation. That is, in working with these leaders, they're not as mean-spirited, and having been on the public company board, they're not as unconcerned. The problem, and this is where I realize it's a paradigm problem. It's the fundamental framework of how we think. Look, every organization, every leader, the boards, they have one fundamental top priority that they must resolve, and that is to create the outcomes necessary to ensure the sustainable growth of the organization,
Right. Right.
right? So
Business.
we
The
just
health
have
of
to
the
accept,
business.
we just have to accept that as that is the reason the business, that's the number one responsibility the organization has, or the leaders have to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's a valid one. Now you can call that whatever you want, profit, market share, whatever quantitative number you want to put on that, but that's the bottom line. And so we have to start off by accepting that. And that's what I did. And then I said, okay, well, if that's the goal, then the problem isn't the goal, it's not the profit motivation, because that has to be the goal. The problem is the way we think about how we as collectives of humans achieve that goal.
Yes.
And it's the thought that we achieve it by thinking of it as a machine. That's the fundamental problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I created a different, I came up with a different thought because I was at a conference once and this woman was asking me what I did. And I told her, explained, you know, I'm a management consultant and I help organizations execute strategy. And she said to me, well, what makes you different than all the other ones out there? And I said,
Yeah.
and I stopped and I thought and I said, you know, I don't know. I guess it's because I think of an organization different. And this goes back to my days at HP where I learned some of the lessons I was sharing earlier. I think of an organization as a living person, as something with a soul, and I treat the organization as if it's a person, like I'm a coach and I'm coaching you as a human being. I coach the organization with the same framework. And she said to me, wow, you should write a book. And you have to understand she's an editor, so in her mind, everybody should write a book. But it triggered in me, you know, my first reaction was not only no, but hell no, I'm not an author. I don't know how to
Yeah.
do that. But it's amazing when a seed of correctness gets planted in my head. So I came back from the conference and I kept rebelling, but it wouldn't go away. So I started to investigate, how do you write a book? And one thing led to another, and 6 years later, I published my book, The Living Organization, which outlines.
Yes. Tell us about that. That's what I want to hear about, Norman, is this, because it's a great title.
So, if you look at an organization as a living person, forget that it's a collective of people for a second. In fact, one of the key principles we have 6 principles, and I'll walk through them all very quickly. The first principle is that the recognition that the creation of results is a process of converting energy from one form to another.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're beginning to recognize that in the machine paradigm, you're dealing primarily with activity, events, not the energy behind those events, right? If you think of it from a quantum physics point of view, it's the notion that in the machine paradigm, you're looking at particles. In the living organization way of it, you're looking at the fact that particles and waves are the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that particles come out of energy fields. So you want to, and I'll get into that in more detail. That's just a fundamental principle. The second principle, and the one I started to talk about a little earlier, is the fact that when a collective of people come together as a common purpose, that collective of people actually gives birth to another living entity that is inclusive but different than each of the individual parts. Now, again, your experience will validate that. Think of a couple of different departments in an organization that you're familiar with. Typically, I say, think of sales department and think of the finance department and describe them. And you'll start using terms like you would to describe a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'll use terms like, well, my sales department, they're outgoing, they're creative, they're unstructured, they're free-flowing, it's hard for them to follow rules. My finance department is very structured, very analytical, very introverted, et cetera, right? These are not mechanistic traits. These are human traits.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter if you change people in the department itself still fundamentally operates the same way. You can do the same thing with organizations. Compare Apple to Microsoft. They have different personalities, different personas. These are human traits. So the second principle is that a collective of people, that an organization, whether it's a department, a team, or the company as a whole, actually can be thought of and actually operates under the same principles you and I as individuals operate.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads you to the question, how do individuals create outcomes? Because if individuals create an outcome and organizations are like individuals, it would be the same process. So if you think about how you create an outcome as an individual, you have to do stuff. There's no doubt about that, right? You have to, plan, you have to type on the computer, you have to, organize things, you have to set goals, what we call activity. But as a human, this is where it starts to differentiate from the machine. As a human, you're always in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And your relationships, the quality of the relationships, or the quality of the interactions of relationships will in fact affect your activity. And think about it from this perspective. If you're in a group of people where everybody's getting along, we experience an increase in energy. We call that synergy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus 2 = 5. If you're in a team of people that doesn't get along or is in conflict, what triggers in you is the sense of defensiveness and protection. And your energy goes from the work you're doing to protecting yourself,
Yeah.
right? So we know relationships has an important role to play in producing outcomes. Again, being humans, we have this other component. Some people call it belief systems, some people call it paradigms, frameworks. I call it context. Though the sense of my definition of how the world works and my role in it. which leads me to a set of beliefs that will inform and determine actually how I will behave in various situations in life. Again, to simplify that, you're walking along and somebody says something to you and you react to it. Right? You didn't think about it, you reacted to it. You have like an internal program that causes you to respond to something. That response could be positive and create high energy, or it could be negative and create low energy. Right? If you're given an option to do something, or you have a vision or a dream, there's a part of you that says that's possible or says that's impossible. That will define what you think is possible to do. It will define your activity. It will define your relationships.
Mhm.
So we have these three fields of what we call energy that you're always working with. And activity, relationship, and context, with the understanding that context is the ultimate driver of relationships and activity. Now, in the machine paradigm, as a leader, how many leaders actually think about what is the underlying energy field that's driving the behaviors that are causing the outcomes we're getting? That never, hardly ever comes up in the conversation when they're doing their strategy planning. They
Right.
don't sit down and say, okay, this is where we want to go. What is the behaviors we currently have? How do we have to have those behaviors changed so that it produces the outcomes we want? And if behaviors are driven by context, how do we change the underlying context so that it supports the new behaviors we want? Now, that's how you can improve the performance of an organization.
Now, you
Mhm.
say, Norman, that when you go in with these guys, this is the type of stuff that you teach them how to do? Is that
Absolutely.
what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I've developed a whole,
And
not only the core principles, but a leadership training, because leaderships need new skills. For example, if you're dealing with people and you're simply dealing at a rational, logical level, which is the machine paradigm way of thinking of things, the ability to connect with them and to truly motivate them and create a psychological safety is really low.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, we know that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we talk about that too.
If you knew how to move from the head to the heart,
Yes.
and then you can communicate from the heart, that brings in that sense of compassion,
Mhm.
empathy, caring that we all talk about, that we know is what actually creates psychological safety. You can't create psychological safety by the 7 steps to psychological safety. You
Right.
only need one step: learn how to be a human being in conversation with another human being.
Right.
Right?
Well, isn't that what's missing in today's world too, though? I mean, it's like, I mean, we're a tech world, right? And so people have lost
Right.
that ability, as Jan and I talk about, to look each other in the eye and be social.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
They're
That's
afraid of it.
that's my big platform is
Yeah.
the communication is missing.
Absolutely.
You can't communicate with a technological device
That's
because
right.
there's 4 of the 5 senses that are engaged when you communicate. And the strongest part of that is, like you said, Norman, is energy. It's energy. It's like
Absolutely.
true
Absolutely.
electrical. Yeah, it's kinetic energy.
Is it,
We talk about this a lot, Jeff and I.
yeah.
It's
Is
yeah.
that
Yeah, I don't
why you
doubt
call
it.
your
It's
company quantum leaders, by the way? Because of
what's
the,
that?
is that why you call the company quantum leader? Because of the energy, or where did that?
Well, it kind of worked the other way around. I was looking for the name to rename the company in 2002 because I was starting to focus it, and I was playing around with all sorts of different names. And as I was driving home from a meeting, I was thinking about it, and the name Quantum Leaders came up.
Oh, fun.
And I
Yeah.
went out and I searched the internet to see if anybody had it, and there was a quantum leader company in the UK that did leadership training, but Quantum Leaders .com was available, and so I
Awesome.
grabbed it, and then I went on and did a
Uh,
corporate search, and I grabbed it.
that's amazing.
And so it was really something inside of me gave me the name, but it clearly, as you started to allude to, clearly representative of what emerged over the next couple of decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
What my
what
work
a
was
story, Norm. My
about.
goodness, you've come from so much to where you're at today. That is
Yeah.
amazing.
It is. It's
And I just
very
want to thank you for
interesting.
sharing that with our listeners.
Are you
It's
very welcome?
really nice. And, I mean, the ability that you have to go into these places and just really uh, bring in all, like you said, this energy and this ability to make them to be human. They're not just cogs in a wheel, right? There's a human factor that has to go with it, I think is amazing. Norman, if people want to get a hold of you and learn more about what it is that you do for them, how can they do that?
I'm N Wolfe, NWOLFE at quantumleaders.com.
Awesome.
My website is www.quantumleaders.com. And if they want to explore a little bit more, there's a white paper. But for all your podcast listeners, I have a site, Quantum Leaders /podcast, where they can get the first 3 chapters of the book for free.
Awesome.
That's great.
So that's a
Yeah.
gift to your audience. Yeah.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Love it. Thanks for sharing your story. We really appreciate that. I just think it's amazing. And you're so right on with your theories and your thoughts of what is needed in this society.
Yes.
You know, Dan and I talk about this all the time, and I just don't
Thank
understand
you.
why people don't get it. You know, it's such a struggle. So,
Well,
listeners,
again,
go ahead.
you just have to remember that they're doing the best they can within the framework that they think will produce the results without
Yes.
understanding the byproducts of it. That's the nature of a paradigm. When you're stuck in a paradigm, you're stuck. And you think you're doing the right things when in fact you may be causing the very problems you're trying to avoid.
Crazy. Well, again, Norman, thank you for being on the show. We really appreciate all our listeners out there. We just love the feedback that you give us. Keep it coming. And as always, we just enjoy the fact that you're listening and just supporting this group. We appreciate it. We're here to support you guys as well. Jan and I both do leadership coaching and communication coaching. So if you ever need any of that, please let us know. You can reach out to either info@pullthechute.net or janet@janetlandry.com. We'd be glad to have a conversation with you. So until the next time, stay safe and be healthy.